Hi, welcome to Tech Beyond Gender podcast. I'm joined by Andrea Bald, who stepped into tech in 1985 and has already been leading teams towards the late 1980s. Her career spans the big transformation projects in telecom communications, from analog to digital, copper to fiber, and now cloud and 5G. Andrea's led through many change transformation projects, built resilient teams, and championed practical inclusion long before it was a headline. We'll dive into her hiring then versus now, her leadership style, and what's next for Telco. Andrea, welcome to Tech Beyond Gender podcast. It's nice to have
Thank
you
you for
here with
having
us.
me.
Now, I know very little about you, so I would like to probe and ask more questions and get to know more about yourself to begin with. Now, take us back to a time when you were a child. Tell us what really prompted you, what sparked your interest in tech.
Well, I have to admit it was all an accident, really. I was an academic all-rounder, so I had no particular leaning. I wanted at various times to be a lawyer, a journalist, an architect of buildings, not of IT, and a professional actor. But the first job that I got out of school was in engineering drafting, so I just absolutely fell into it. I took the first job that I got, and that was sort of the beginning. When I left high school, I admit I dropped out of high school in year 13, my intent was to get a job for about 18 months until I was 18, because I was just before my 17th birthday, and I wanted to apply for the New Zealand Drama School because that was my big thing at that time. And then I applied for a range of different jobs in accounting, sort of clerical, entry-level jobs, and then there was this one as an engineering draftswoman or drafting trainee for the New Zealand Post Office, which was the precursor to Telecom, which is now Spark and Chorus. And that was the job that I happened to get, and that had a 3-year training course associated with it. And so I decided I would stick it out through the 3 years. And of course, by the time 3 years had gone by, then the whole acting thing had just gone out the window and I was quite enjoying myself. So I just sort of carried on that path. So it was quite by accident.
So, engineering drafting, you mentioned
Yes,
your first job. So, how was that? Were there many women doing that role?
there were not. There were a few. I don't know how big the drawing office, I was in the Hamilton District Engineer's office. I don't know how many drafting staff there were altogether, but there was only a very small handful of women amongst, tens of staff. And the job was very, our role was to go out in the field and measure and record the location of cables that had just been laid and then come back and plot them on the underground plans, and to do various other things. So the post office in those days used to do everything. It made its own furniture. So there were, all sorts of weird and wonderful types of technical drawing basically to be done. But the main thing was the telephone network. It was all very manual. I had a drawing board with a fluorescent light across the top and a T-square and ink pens. And when you're a trainee into that, the first several weeks are spent doing printing practice so that you can write on plans and no one can know, no one can tell who wrote it. You're in some very nondescript standard font.
Nice. So, how was it to enter into a telecom space in 80s?
The office was quite, people were quite professionally dressed and things like that. But at the same time, there were sort of centerfold pictures up on the walls in part of the office, which was pretty unusual. Or maybe it can't have been unusual. People didn't seem to comment on it. It was To me, I didn't know anything different. Like I say, I was not quite 17 and it was a job. And so I was entering the world of work, and it didn't really occur to me that there was anything special or different about that job versus a clerical job in an accounting office. And I've often said that if my first job had been in a lawyer's office, I probably would be a lawyer now. If it had been in an accounting office, I probably would have been an accountant now. As it was, engineering drafting. So I ended up going through, I wouldn't say I'm an engineer now, but went through engineering school and on a sort of a technical path.
Okay. So what surprised you most in this role in the first 18 months?
I can't recall anything that particularly surprised me, except I just found I enjoyed the variety. So, like I say, there was the outside cable teams that were recording location and plotting cable, and there was the floor plans and rack face layouts and some furniture drawings and things like that. And then I also got into doing printed circuit board layout, all manual, with designing the layout of a printed circuit board and then making a prototype using a scalpel and cutting the tape and putting the end bits on to make a little prototype that things could then be solded into. So there was a lot of variety, and I enjoyed that. So after I'd done my technician certificate, or when I was getting towards the end of my technician certificate and was enjoying the job, I thought maybe I'd carry on with a New Zealand certificate in engineering. But again, by happenstance, chance, luck, whatever, I ended up going to university to do an engineering degree. Literally, I was doing the crossword in the Saturday New Zealand Herald, and next to the crossword was an ad for what was Telecom by that time, engineering bursaries, where they would sponsor you through university. And so I applied for it, going, oh yeah, I'll do that instead of NZCE. And so off I went to Auckland University for 4 years doing an engineering degree. By the time I'd been there about 6 months, I knew that I was really enjoying it and I wanted to see it through, because I really hadn't planned it. And I don't think, before I joined my first job in the drawing office, I don't think I'd ever even heard of engineering as a job. Ironically, 2 decades later, I discovered that I come from a long line of civil engineers, but I had not a clue at the time. I knew about lawyers and teachers and architects and things like that, didn't know about engineers. So I went to engineering school, then came back into the engineering network office of Telecom in Hamilton, and they had sort of an engineering graduates program where they would move you around. And so I think I was on my second thing, which was in back in the sort of underground telephone cable section, but as a team leader. And then Telecom had a restructure, as they were doing very regularly in the 90s. And the team lead job disappeared. And I thought, oh, I don't really know how to be a designer, so I better apply for the manager role. And so I did that, and I ended up getting one of those manager roles and leading a team of these designers whose role had grown out of being draftspeople. So that was quite tricky. I had a team of 20 spread across 3 offices, Hamilton, Rotorua and Tauranga. Of those 20, I think there were 3 women, but 2 of them were administration staff and one technical designer in my team. So that was, I was just turned 25. I was 3 years in the drawing office and 18 months out of university. And I had, one of the team say to me, for example, you can't do this job. You don't even know how to change a tyre. And I genuinely couldn't do their job. I just had to figure out how to be a leader of a role that I understood but I couldn't do. I have to say I did swear after that, after 3 years in that role, which I loved and was quite successful in. I swore that I would never again step into a leadership role from within the team that I was in.
Hmm.
It's tough.
So, what did you do to earn trust of those engineers who you were managing?
I just had to, I think there was an element of faking it till I make it. One of the things that I was lucky with, as I say, there were 3 offices. I'd worked in the Hamilton office as a trainee draftswoman, but I didn't know the people in the other 2 offices. So I went in with no baggage with them, and I was really grateful for that. My leadership, I think I was probably a servant leader before I knew the term. So my understanding of my role was to try and make things go as smoothly as possible so that I wouldn't be needed. And so my whole sort of ethos was I'm here to support you. I'm not supervising you. I can't do the job. I can't tell you how to do the job, but I can ask the right questions to help you analyze problems and figure out which way to go with something that was an issue. So I really had no interference in their day-to-day work. But if they had something that they didn't quite know how to deal with it, or a customer that was a bit tricky, I would help them ask the right questions and help them with the decision making of which way to do a design or whatever. I think also I was always and always have been willing to keep questioning until I really understand something. So, yeah, I could then be quite clear in my advice because I had questioned them enough to know what their issues were. And so I think, in a sense, it was just I earned their trust and their respect through performance.
So, what were the challenges you mentioned that you had managing this team?
Well, I think because I'd worked within the office with these people who had developed while I was at university from being draftspeople into designers, because there was this enormous change going on in the company. And I'd been a junior. So some of the people in my team I'd been a junior with, but most of them I'd been a junior below. So there was that. And I guess the other thing was it was coming from a very hierarchical organisation. So when I joined, it was still the New Zealand Post Office, which was a government department. And the only way you could get promoted was through a huge amount of time and basically being at the top of a very long list. And so it was all very structured. And by the time I came back from university, and telecom had been in existence for a few years as sort of a proper private sector or semi-private sector business, it was much more a meritocracy. But that takes quite a long time for people's mindset to change from it being this hierarchical structure of longevity to being a meritocracy. So some young upstart can go and get a leadership job.
Is that what you really wanted to do? Because you had engineering qualification as well, right? Did you ever think, oh, I wish I could just be more hands on and use that skill set which you got from university?
Yes, in a way I did. So one of the things that I did in the first few years, while I was still in my 20s, there was quite a lot of emphasis at Auckland Engineering School about trying to encourage more women into engineering school. So when I was there, I was doing electrical engineering, electrical and electronic. There was a class in my year group of about 100, and of that, 6 women. So there was a really strong push to try and encourage women into engineering in general. And there was a person whose full-time job it was to try and do that. So I would speak sometimes at careers evenings about, engineering type stuff, but I felt like such a fraud because I wasn't even doing it anymore. And so I really loved my leadership role though, and it had a fantastic combination because I still needed to have ability to assimilate technical information and make decisions without necessarily being hands-on. But I think if I went back into something hands-on, yeah, enjoy that perfectly fine. What happened though was that it was time for me to start having a family. So when I was on parental leave, I was lining up my first job back, and that was going to be back into a technology job because I was probably going back part-time. So I didn't feel that I could have a leadership role because I wouldn't be there. So I went to part-time university while I was on parental leave to do a management diploma. And that was I've got the engineering degree and the management experience, and I'm going back into this engineering job. Now I want to get the management qualification to sort of balance things up. And I think I'd figured out that I wanted to be in a leadership role. But because I worked part-time for many years, that wasn't enough formal people leader role or management role.
I had read one research article, where it sort of hinted to the fact that us women, when we don't see people like ourselves in certain roles, like example,
Yeah,
engineering roles, you sort of tend to think that, okay, that's probably not my space, and you sort of levitate towards more management roles or project
possibly.
management
Yes,
roles. What are your thoughts
yes.
on that?
I think that's absolutely true. Like I believe that, you can be what you can see. Um, I guess, like I said, I'd always been an all-rounder. You know, I don't consider myself an extrovert, but I do consider myself a people person. And I just, like I say, I never thought about, oh, I'm a woman in technology. I knew I was in a minority, and I knew I was good at the technology stuff. My engineering degree, I flew through, and um, but yeah, I guess I've always sought a bit of that balance between the early on, even in a technical role, it was I can cope with the technical stuff, but I can write well and get things across as well. And over the years, that also evolved into I can assimilate technical information. I can deal with, intellectually deal with technology. That's fine. But also, I really enjoy the people side of things. And technology is for people, about people, from people. So I think it's probably true that I didn't gravitate into a deeply technical role. But I remember being at university and talking to some of my fellow students there, the guys, and they had always been into pulling things to bits and seeing how they worked, and I was like, So I probably did always feel like a little bit of a fraud.
Now, it's like, from your perspective, right? Like how you mentioned, you really enjoyed what you were doing, and you didn't really feel that you were in minority too, like, because you just loved what you were doing and you just probably kept going. Was there a specific moment or a situation or a phase in your career where you sort of really stepped back and realized, hey, there are not many women around me? Why and what can be done?
Probably not until I was in architecture. So in the early days when I was in the sort of telco network roles, and after I went back after having children, or during the period I was having children, I sort of evolved into a business analyst role. Again, it's got the business side rather than the deeply technical side. And in business analysis, there is a higher proportion of women. It's interesting that although it's got the word business in it, it is actually a pretty technical role in the sense that you will be much better at it if you can cope with the technical side of it, and working incredibly closely with the solution architects, as you'd know. It didn't even occur to me about moving into solution architecture or anything like that. I think there was one project I remember the solution architect I was working with said, oh, if you ever want a career change, you could go that way. So I mean, I knew I was in a minority, but it was probably not until I was in architecture that I was much more aware of it. And even then, my pathway was through business architecture. So I guess I've always put that down to me and my sort of all-roundedness and interest in people and anything, as opposed to being very focused on technology rather than it being a systemic thing. But, the numbers would tell a different story.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't think, like, now I'm in architecture, and even now I do see very few women. I don't think things have changed. Which year are you talking about? When did you become a solution architect? Or like
So I was never a
stepped into
solution architect. I moved from being a business analyst to a business architect at the beginning of 2012. And then over time, that role sort of morphed. So there was a business process data architecture practice alongside the solution architecture and then the principal solution architecture teams. But through restructuring, the business process data architecture got absorbed in to be business and IT architecture. And so I just sort of moved from being a business analyst and became a principal solution architect. So it's a bit like when I was in the design manager role back in the 90s. I don't think I'd know where to start to be a solution architect, but I think I can still support and help and guide solution architects through the questions that I asked, the trying to get my head into bits. One of the skills that I think I've got, and I've been told I've got, is having a feel for when to drill into the detail and when to go, no, you're okay, you're on the right track. So my architecture is very much at the boxes and lines rather than the specific technologies. But to do that and to give a solution architect guidance, you still need to get your head around the specific technologies in certain cases so that you can help make a decision about whether it should go this way or that way, and what the architecture, the solution choice should be. And so it's a little bit like that, asking the questions, drilling in, trying to see the bigger picture and all the different strands. But I couldn't start from scratch with a blank sheet of paper and design a solution. I can give you the boxes and lines high level, but I think they're just different skill sets, and they're complementary and they're equally necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree with that. Now, being in telecom since 80s, literally, you would have seen all of the transformations, right? Be it analog to digital, from 2G to 5G. Are there any specific transformation projects that you have been involved in which really strike to you, like you really enjoyed your time and you thought, wow, I've learned heaps from here?
I think, to me, one of the biggest transformations was there are really obvious ones about all the fixed line to mobile and copper to fibre, and I experienced in the workplace huge change in technology, from everything being manual to the advent of ubiquitous computing, communication technology. And when I came back from university, there was this newfangled fancy thing. Oh, this just seems like a history lesson now. This newfangled fancy thing in the office, and it was a fax machine, and it seemed like magic. And this is 1991, which doesn't feel like very long ago. So from fax and then to email and then instant messaging and chat and then video calling just had a huge impact on the workplace. Fixed to mobile was huge. The information age was huge. where you just have information at your fingertips. But actually, the biggest one for me that probably affected my career was the change from engineering centricity to, everything was all about the network and everything being well engineered and blah, 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 to real product centricity. And so probably in the 2000s, telecom starts thinking about products and network-based products. And so then I was moving into that business analysis type role and working on products like remote office connectivity, mobile push-to-talk technology, and how that would be implemented in New Zealand. And so there was a lot that was around products, and I was no longer in a world of the network. And it was interesting that later in my career, when I moved sort of 4 years ago out of architecture and into a senior leadership role, that was back in the world of the network and engineering centricity, which felt a bit like coming home. Despite the fact that all of the projects that I'd worked on over the years, without the engineering, without the IT, there is no product. But the perspective of coming in of we've got to sell things as opposed to we're providing a network that is just a service.
So, besides this, working in technology, working in telecom, and being a mom, having your own personal responsibilities, I also hear that you were quite involved in a specific sport and you
I
represented New
was.
Zealand.
I
Yeah, tell
did.
us more about that.
Again, so my former husband was big into target shooting, specifically pistol target shooting, and I took that up in about 2004 when our youngest child was like one, just turning one, and I discovered I really liked it, and I was on parental leave and then working part-time, so I had time to devote to it. And discovered that I was quite good at this pistol target shooting thing, and ended up getting into the New Zealand high performance squad, which then meant I was up for selection for the Commonwealth Games team. And I got selected for the Commonwealth Games team for Melbourne in 2006, which was just a mind-blowing out there experience. And again, it felt like by chance. I was not someone who grew up going, my goal is to represent my country in a sport. And so I'm just, my mind was blown. Yeah, it was incredible.
Are you still into any sport? Are you still into shooting?
I am not into shooting. I pick up I only have air pistols now, no live fire pistols. I pick my air pistol up maybe once every couple of years and I go, oh, I really like this. I must do some more. But I just haven't had the time to devote to it. And I've got, my life has moved on. But I don't think I'll ever completely, sell my air pistol or anything. Yeah,
Did
now
you
now I'm into more
manage?
sedentary things, more
Yeah.
sedentary than standing still and squeezing one finger.
So what are you into right now?
So my 40 years, nearly 40 years in telco finished in earlier this year. So I am currently between jobs, and my partner and I have relocated to the wonderful Central Otago. And so I'm currently settling in before I figure out my next steps work-wise. So I am enjoying gardening and yoga and bike rides and all of those leisurely things. But the time's going by now, so I'm getting much closer to I'm settled and now I'm ready to get my teeth back into something.
Yeah, absolutely. You just mentioned about yoga, and I do yoga practice and I also facilitate courses. And you cannot undermine the value of yoga, right? It's like it just has an impact on all different dimensions. It's not just physical, it's
It
mental,
does.
emotional, and just gives you the strength and stamina to work through anything.
Yeah, I had never done yoga at all until about less than 18 months ago, maybe 18 months ago. And I made a New Year's resolution that I needed to do something physical because my job was quite demanding and I was very sedentary. So about 6 months after New Year, I finally started doing one-to-one yoga classes because they were convenient, round the corner from home. And I knew that if it was a class, I'd go, oh no, I'm leaving work late. I've got something to do. I'll never get there. So I made appointments. And I had a year of weekly one-to-one yoga classes. And since I've moved down here to Central Otago, I did my first ever actual yoga class, which, but I'm now going 3 or 4 times a week and I love it. But I was very grateful to have the yoga in Auckland. That really helped me in my last year in Auckland and going through the huge change of my job finishing and preparing to shift down south and everything was great. Like you say, far from just physical.
Absolutely, yes.
Mm.
Now it's going back into your career and stuff, right? So obviously being in management, you would have been involved in a lot of recruitment process and stuff. So what, from your perspective, has changed with regards to recruitment from 1990s to now? What did interviews look and feel like then?
Yes, I remember vaguely my own interview for joining the post office, and I got a bit of a guided tour around the office, which was it's overwhelming. It's madness doing things like that. You never really know. You're this, high school kid being taken up and down stairs to different floors and really not having a clue of what they were talking about in terms of what the role was and things like, we do have some ladies here somewhere, literally. Um, when I was in the design team management role in the 90s, I went on a course on behavioral interviewing, competency interviewing, which was the foundational premise that past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. So ask, what did you do rather than what would you do? And, when I came full circle after years and years and years out of leadership or out of management and back into a bit of recruitment, lo and behold, that behavioral competency interviewing is still the big thing. And I say, thank goodness for that, because I believe in it. It makes sense to me. I've experienced interviewing alongside someone who really just had a bit of a chat, and I think that's terrible. That just leads to bias all over the show, and really doesn't do anything to create a level playing field. And you want a level playing field so that people can show their skills and abilities and experience, not be a test of how friendly they are or how extroverted they are. The interview that I had for my architecture job was a real eye opener. I got sent the questions first, and I'd never come across that, but I think it's a great idea, because a job interview should not be a test of how quick on your feet you are to answer questions. So actually being able to prepare answers and think about, you should always, I guess, do that sort of preparation anyway. But it was great to have the questions, and it took a lot of the nerves away and all of those things that can really adversely affect interviews. So I haven't done that more recently, but I do think it's a great idea. I have interviewed a couple of interns or candidate interns, and really saw from a senior leadership position a university student and how nerve-wracking it is for them, and people with who are neurospicy and how different or how difficult interviews can be for them. Also, I've got this really strong memory of interviewing a young woman for a job in the design team back in the 90s. And she had no experience, no direct experience. But I was able to ask her questions that said, can you tell me about a time when you've learned a new system, learned a new technology? And she was able to use an example of learning how to use a lotto machine in a lotto shop. Totally unrelated to the job, but it enabled her to demonstrate or describe the skills that she had and how she'd approached problems or newness and all of those sorts of things. I did give her the job. She was great, and she has ended up with a career in technology, as I believe.
Oh, wow. That is because that was going to be my next question for you, because you mentioned about level playing field and
Yeah.
like being able to talk about your previous experiences, right?
Mm.
I was just going to say, like how you mentioned, even at your engineering school when you studied, of 100 men, there were like 6 women,
Yeah.
right? So how do you create a level playing field? Because it's a sector which is like dominated by men, and
Yeah.
men have more exposures to maybe the technical jargons and the knowledge behind a lot of the systems, whereas
Mm.
women will struggle to actually maybe explain, uh, giving their past experiences, right? They
Mm.
might be
Mm.
interested to try, and obviously uh, they are they will be multi-skilled to be able to learn that, acquire that skill set, but being able to demonstrate that with a
Yeah.
behavioral uh, thing, for
Yeah.
behavioral question, something relating to technology might be a
Yes.
challenge.
I think, one of the problems is that when the financial context is quite difficult, that everyone who's employing someone wants to get someone who can hit the ground running. So
Yeah.
we keep on employing for experience,
Yeah.
which means that the pool of candidates we have are smaller, only have the people with experience, which are predominantly men instead of women. So the financial context sort of naturally prioritizes experience over potential. You have to be really committed to growing the pool of candidates by creating entry-level roles, by being willing to, don't specify tertiary education unless it's actually professionally needed for the job. Obviously you can't say, I want a lawyer who's not got a law degree. If you're actually doing, engineering design work that requires the degree and professional registration and all of that, so obviously you need the tertiary education. Don't specify direct experience unless it's genuinely needed for that job, and then you naturally have a wider net of candidates, because you're not, um, reducing it by insisting on having the direct experience, the tertiary education, all of those things where women are underrepresented. I think I also, given that I am between jobs, I'm looking at a lot of job ads, and I think it's great, the ones that say, we are open to candidates of all backgrounds. Obviously, not every background is not going to be suitable, but actually explicitly saying, overtly inviting people who might not normally, particularly with that, statistical research thing of women thinking they need 95% fit before they'll even apply, trying to overtly invite a wider range of people to apply for roles, I think is really useful. Beyond that, things like, outreach to polytechs and university and high schools is all very well. fundamentally we need outreach to kindergartens and parenting groups. Say, kill the assumptions, because I think there's so much bias built in that by the time a kid's at primary school, they might not know it and their parents might not know it, but they're quite likely already on a path that's going to veer towards or not towards technology or whatever. Yeah, in the same way that most boys are probably going to be on a path that's veering away from nursing or sewing or whatever it might be.
So, as you said, like biases exist. And in your career, do you remember a time where you took deliberate measures to attract more women applying for technical roles?
I don't think so specifically. So back in the 90s when that scenario that I described then, I employed a young man and it just wasn't a thing then, if you know what I mean. More recently, I know in the organisation I was working for, there were policies about, checking the language to make sure that it wasn't inadvertently showing a bias, a very subtle bias towards one gender. The biggest thing that I keep hearing from people who are recruiting, even within policies of that and of policies of having X number or X percent of women candidates, is I don't get the applications. And that's why I think that those things about not prioritising direct experience, being willing to have someone who won't necessarily hit the ground running. That's not to say that there won't be women who will hit the ground running, but your pool of candidates is smaller, so it's harder.
Is that an interview tactic that helped you spot great talent?
I think I'd really just go back to that behavioural thing and trying to see past the person's demeanour, nerves. I don't think there's a particular technique apart from that, have a structured behavioural interview. But I guess throwing in a bit that allows them to show their, not personality, I mean, because it's not really about that, but there's an ability to fit, and I don't mean that fit in a just like me or a just like everyone else thing. Their ability to show how their diversity might bring value. Yeah, their particular difference or whatever. But I don't think there are any particular techniques that I'm aware of that help. I do think it's important to have a panel of interviewers and more than one interview to try and at least not have just the one bias or two biases, to try and get a bit of a range, and to choose your interview panel very well so that you can have really decent debate, really decent open debate.
Have you had mentors in your careers, or have you mentored anyone?
I have not had anyone who was ever like designated as a mentor. I have had women who have sort of paved the way. I particularly remember that from when I was young and I was having children. There were a couple of women engineers a few years ahead of me, and they'd worked part-time. They still had, were seen as very successful, although they were in part-time holding patterns rather than big career trajectories. I know that there have been people that have had my back, men probably more than women, to be honest, just because of the proportions. But it's never been a spoken about thing. There's never been a person who said, I'll help you guide your career. And I don't think I ever looked for it. I think one of the things that I benefited from is I never had any assumptions about what I could or couldn't do. The worst thing I did was not be clear that I was ambitious. I kept that sort of on the down low until I went to a fantastic course through my workplace, which was offered to some women, and that gave me the courage to speak my ambition. And within a relatively short time after that, my career, jumped up another step, which was great. I have mentored other people, and particularly women. A young woman who was in a role, sort of a technical sales type role, working in a team with some sort of engineering background, older men who had been there for a long time, and her confidence was quite low. So just sort of talking her through that, giving some practical tips for how to ask questions without letting anyone ever roll their eyes that you're asking a question. Awful sort of slightly self-deprecating techniques, but they work. Things like, I'm really sorry I think I'm being obtuse here, but can you just explain that one more time? So you sort of acknowledge I'm being obtuse, or I know there's no dumb questions, but this might be one. I'm trying you, or I know I should know this already, but blah, blah, blah. So, and I also led a mentoring circle at work a couple of years ago for a couple of years, or maybe a few years ago for a couple of years. And that wasn't really focused specifically on technology or on women or anything, but I really enjoyed that.
What are you looking forward to in future with regards to telco and technology?
So I have probably made quite an effort to disconnect myself, excuse the pun, from telco. Like, not physically disconnect myself from telco, obviously, but trying to sort of detach myself from this long career in telco. And I'm excited about for myself what might be next. That is technology, architecture, leadership, decision making, sort of guidance type things, technology/business guidance. I think that for telco, though, there's a big challenge about wireless versus fixed, with the advent and the technology explosion in the satellite world. And AI is beginning to be huge in telco, as in everything. So I think AI is probably the next revolution, from the information age into artificial intelligence. It's just everywhere now. And I think it's going to reshape all the knowledge work type roles, as well as telco itself with, artificial intelligence network shaping and traffic management and all of those sorts of things. Yeah.
To a 16-year-old who doesn't see herself in tech yet, what would you say?
I would say think about the things that you're good at and the things that you like doing. They normally join up. It's really hard to like something that you're not very good at. And when you're good at it, it's usually pretty easy to like it. So think about the things that you like doing, not what I want to be. The job that I had when I was 16, 17 does not exist in the same form now. Nowhere near. It's all been, computerized, digitized, taken away altogether, GPSed instead of manual, and all of that sort of thing. And the job that I had as an architect when I was in architecture didn't exist when I was new in the workforce. So it's risky to say, I want to be a. It's much better to say, I want to do for now, or I'm going to give this a go and see where it leads. And you'll learn what you like, what you don't like. And you can still have a fantastic career that just sort of accidentally follows interesting opportunities. And, like I said, when I started in my career, the term technology just wasn't really a thing. So who knows what it'll be in another 30 years or 40 years when that 16-year-old is moving into it. IT wasn't a thing, except for in some of the upper echelons of universities and things like that. So think about the things you're good at, think about the things that you like to do, and keep a hunger for learning, because everything will change. And I hate the term keeping up, but actually it doesn't feel like keeping up when you're in it. It's just, oh, this new thing's coming along and you learn about it. So yeah, keep a curiosity, an openness to new things, an openness to change, openness to opportunities, and and speak your ambition.
That's a really good advice. That's a really good advice. What would you do to convince a mid-career woman who's considering to pivot into telco? Where should they start?
So telco is quite a little word and a huge world of opportunities. So I would say start talking to people who are in telco, join groups, network, or learn, find out what's in there. Again, following that, what are the skills that you can offer? What are the things that you like doing? Not what do you want to be? And when you're mid-career, you have a lot of different constraints. You've got mortgages and children and need for flexibility and all of those sorts of things. So it might be really hard to go into an entry-level job. But that's why talking to people, finding out what's around, the sorts of things that you might like that might fit within those constraints. Really, just like any other career, it's no scarier than anything else. It's technology, schmechnology, in the nicest possible way. We all love it. You go through your career, and as you learn and mature and grow and get more wisdom over years and decades, one of the things, this sounds sort of silly, but an epiphany that I had years ago, quite some years ago, was not everyone thinks the way that I think. Not everyone has the same structured approach or this. So things that I go, but it's not rocket science. Actually, not everyone has that skill to bring strands together or to get clarity out of chaos or whatever it might be. But actually, none of it's rocket science when you start getting into it at the edge and work your way in. So don't be intimidated by technology.
Yeah, I get intimidated by it every day, even though I'm working in technology.
Same. Like I say, there's a little element of fake it till you make it. There's an element of seeing other women doing it and going, well, why can't I? If I can see it, yeah, don't be intimidated and claim the space. All those things are much, much easier said than done. But as time goes by, a little bit of practice makes you better at it.
Yeah, I'll take that advice from you. So before we close, I have a few rapid fire questions for you. The first one is, what is the first piece of tech you fell in love with?
I regret to say it's probably my mobile phone. I'm joined at the hip to it. I'm definitely need a technology detox from my phone.
Yeah. So, what is the most underrated role in telco teams?
It's probably the admin support people. That is probably the case in many other organisations. They just oil the wheels to keep the organisation going. In telco specifically, the one that springs to mind is like network technology, network architecture. But I've worked closely with them in teams where they're not underrated because that is what they do. But actually, it's that network is the foundation of all of the products that you can sell. It's the foundation of your operational continuity and reliability and availability. So I don't know if it's underrated. It's foundational. Absolutely foundational. Without the network, but that goes to the architects, the network technologists, the field crews that put it there and fix it and keep it going, and But then if you're in network technology, you probably don't really rate all that product stuff. I think many people underrate the things that are closest to them and the things that are furthest away. So in business, in corporate life, I think the emphasis can swing a bit, from the 2000s, which was the first time that we went, well, there's network and there's products. Sometimes the emphasis is on product, sometimes the emphasis is on network. So, when I was in chorus, rolling out the network was the biggest focus for some years. And then that shifts into the products that can be built on top of that network and offered based on that network. So just the emphasis changes over time.
So, if you could send one message to Andrea from 1985 before her first day in a new job, what would it be?
I don't think there's one. I think there's two. One is, this is the door into a world of opportunities, and no matter what you find you enjoy, there will be work relating to it. And the second one would be, ambition is okay. Being ambitious is okay, because I was always ambitious, but it was very under the radar and held very internally, and that didn't stand me in good stead for a long time.
Thank you, Andrea. It was really lovely to have this conversation with you. Any final thoughts or piece of advice to our listeners?
Look, the one thing I would go back to is, technology is not intimidating. It's just interesting. Yeah, tech is cool.
Great. Thanks so much, Andrea. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Meena. Lovely talking to you.